Sometimes, the people the world overlooks are the ones who hold the power to heal it. In a tower of glass and steel, a billionaire mother had lost all hope until a quiet janitor, a man carrying his own grief, did what no one else could. With a single act of kindness, he reached a child no therapist, no nanny, and no fortune could save. This isn't a story about money or success. It's about how love, even from the humblest heart, can rebuild a broken soul. And before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story tonight? In a city that never stopped raining, even skyscrapers seemed to cry. Inside one of them, Vivienne Hale stood before the wall of glass that overlooked Portland's gray horizon. The streets below shimmered with wet reflections, umbrellas moving like slow, colorful dots in a sea of silver. The Hale Biotech Tower rose 30 floors high, a monument to innovation, precision, and control, just like the woman who built it. Her morning began the same way it always did. Coffee brewed to the exact second, calendar filled to the edge, silence absolute. The world outside could flood or freeze, and Vivienne would still arrive at her office before dawn, her hair pinned tight, her suit pressed, her eyes dry. Behind her, the door hissed open. A therapist in a beige coat stepped out of the children's suite adjoining her office. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hale," she said quietly, avoiding Vivienne's gaze. "Your daughter still isn't speaking. She just sits there." Vivienne nodded once, dismissing her with a polite murmur. When the door closed, the silence deepened. She turned toward the glass again, her reflection ghost-like against the storm. Still not speaking, she crossed the hall to the small playroom designed for her daughter. White shelves, colorful toys, a corner where a little girl once sang and drew sunshine on every wall. Now the crayons lay untouched. Lydia sat by the window, her knees to her chest, clutching a paper plane made from an old company brochure. "Sweetheart," Vivienne whispered. Her voice softened, unused to tenderness. "It's lunchtime. Maybe you'd like some soup?" No answer. The girl's gaze stayed fixed on the window, on the endless drizzle outside. Vivienne crouched beside her. "Or maybe," she tried again, "we could read one of your books?" Lydia's lips barely moved. "I don't want books." Her tone was flat, like someone speaking from far away. Vivienne's throat tightened. "Then what do you want, baby?" The child turned, and for a fleeting second, her eyes blue-gray like the sky flashed with something raw. "I want Daddy back." Vivienne froze. The air seemed to drain from the room. She reached out, but Lydia jerked away, the paper plane falling between them. When Vivienne finally stood, she felt as if the world had tilted. It had been 3 months since the plane crash that took Richard Hale's life, but inside this tower, time refused to move. Even the air smelled the same sterile, faintly of disinfectant and printer paper. She went back to her office, passing assistants who lowered their eyes respectfully. On her desk sat a folder she'd avoided all morning. Lydia Hale, Psychological Evaluation #9. She flipped it open. Patient exhibits post-traumatic silence, unresponsive to therapy. Recommendation: partial hospitalization. Her hand trembled. She closed the file, pressing it to her chest as though to muffle her own heartbeat. The woman who once convinced senators and CEOs now couldn't reach a 7-year-old child. Outside, rain streaked the glass like tears the city refused to wipe away. Somewhere deep in the building, a faint sound echoed metal wheels rolling, a mop swishing across marble. The janitorial crew had begun their shift. Vivienne barely noticed. She stood in the quiet, the hum of the air conditioning, the only witness to her breaking composure. One tear slipped down her cheek. She caught it mid-fall, ashamed, and turned back toward the glass. Vivienne forced herself to refocus. She pressed the intercom. "Paula," she said softly, her voice steadying into command. "Cancel the afternoon meeting with the legal team. Tell them we'll review the patent case next week." "Yes, ma'am," her assistant replied. When the line clicked off, Vivienne walked to her bookshelf. The framed photo of Richard still stood there, him in a navy coat, his arm wrapped around Lydia at a summer fair. Both smiling, ice cream dripping down their hands. The laughter in that picture felt like it belonged to strangers. She set the photo face down. The day dragged on in a blur of polite handshakes and silent corridors. A delivery of orchids arrived from a board member she didn't notice. Her assistant brought lunch, she barely touched it. Numbers, reports, contracts, they filled the spaces where words of comfort should have been. By 4 o'clock, the building began to empty. Employees whispered goodbyes in the elevator lobby. Vivienne lingered by the window, watching headlights smear across the wet asphalt below. She thought about the paper plane still lying in Lydia's room. She'd left it there, as if removing it would erase her husband's memory. Her reflection in the glass looked older than 41. "You built an empire," she muttered to herself. "Why can't you fix one heart?" No answer came, only the soft hum of the city breathing outside. She shut off the lights and walked to the elevator. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing her own face again in mirrored steel, unflinching, unreadable. But as the doors closed, she saw the faintest trace of a figure down the corridor, a man in a navy uniform, pushing a cleaning cart. He moved quietly, head bowed, as if apologizing for existing. His mop left a clean trail through the marble, erasing muddy footprints one by one. There was something about that slow, careful rhythm that made her pause. He didn't glance her way. He simply kept working. Invisible in a place built on noise and power. Vivienne almost called out a reflex from years of leadership, but something stopped her. The man seemed to carry his silence like a prayer, and she, who had forgotten how to pray, couldn't bring herself to interrupt. The elevator doors closed. Down in the lobby, the city lights glimmered against the polished floors. Umbrellas folded, shoes squeaked. The smell of wet pavement drifted in. The janitor finished his task and leaned on his cart for a moment, eyes tracing the distant skyline through the glass. The tower shimmered above him, its silver edges vanishing into mist. He whispered under his breath, the words carried only to himself. "So this is where the world forgets to feel." The alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., long before dawn had stretched across the rooftops of Portland. Caleb Rowan reached out a tired hand and silenced it without opening his eyes. For a moment he lay still, listening to the soft hiss of the radiator and the distant rumble of a passing train. His apartment was small, 2 rooms, 1 window, but it was clean, and that mattered to him. When he finally sat up, the gray light of early morning filtered through thin curtains. Dust motes floated like slow-moving snow. He made coffee in a dented metal pot and poured it into a chipped mug, the one with a faded drawing of a rocket ship, his son's favorite. The photograph on the wall beside the window always caught his eye at this hour. A little boy with straw blonde hair grinned at the camera, front tooth missing, a stuffed dog tucked under his arm. Owen, age 5. "Morning, buddy," Caleb murmured, his voice rough but gentle. "Coffee's terrible as usual." He smiled to himself, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. After a quiet breakfast of toast and apples, he put on his Navy janitor uniform, smoothing the frayed patch over his chest that read Clean Pro Services. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows. He didn't mind. He preferred clothes that didn't demand attention. Outside, the air was cold and smelled faintly of rain and old wood. He locked the door, fed a stray tabby that waited near the stairwell, and made his way toward the St. John's Bridge, its Gothic towers vanishing into mist. The city was waking up. Garbage trucks growled, coffee shops clicked open, and somewhere a church bell marked 6 o'clock. Caleb boarded the MAX train, settling in the corner with his lunch bag. Around him, commuters scrolled through phones, eyes down, earbuds in. He liked it that way. Everyone inside their own little world. The rhythmic hum of the tracks felt steadying, predictable. He reached into his canvas satchel and took out a small pouch filled with handmade toys. A felt rabbit, a tiny wooden car, a patchwork bear. Every piece bore uneven stitches and clumsy love. He had made them for Owen years ago. He still made one each week, though there was no small pair of hands waiting to receive them anymore. When the train stopped downtown, he stepped off into the drizzle, shoulders hunched. His boots squeaked faintly on the wet pavement as he walked the few blocks to Hale Biotech Tower, the glass giant that dominated the skyline. He'd been working there only 2 months, but already he knew every smudge on the 30th floor windows, every stubborn stain on the marble. "Morning, Mr. Rowan," called a cheerful voice as he entered the side entrance. It was Marisol Vega, the cafe owner from the small coffee stand tucked beside the lobby. Her dark curls were pinned back under a floral scarf. "You're early again. You trying to beat the sunrise?" Caleb smiled faintly. "Old habit, I guess." Marisol handed him a paper cup. "Black coffee, no sugar. On the house, mijo. You'll go broke doing that, he said. She waved her hand. Nonsense. Every man needs someone to look out for him. He thanked her, dropped $1 in the tip jar labeled Kindness Matters, and headed for the service elevator. The ride up was silent except for the low hum of machinery. When the doors opened, the 30th floor spread before him bright, sterile, quiet. He began his rounds. Dusting conference tables, polishing glass doors, replacing trash liners, every motion practiced, almost meditative. Sometimes he hummed under his breath, an old tune his wife used to sing when she worked night shifts at the hospital. Around noon, he paused by a window overlooking the city. Rain tapped softly against the glass, blurring the skyline into watercolor shapes. In the reflection, his face looked older than his 38 years. There were lines there that no amount of sleep could erase. He thought of Owen's laughter, sharp and clear as a bell, echoing through the old apartment. Then of silence, the kind that stayed after tragedy, the kind he'd never managed to escape. Caleb sighed, picked up his mop, and returned to work. But just as he rounded the corner toward the executive hallway, he saw her, the little girl, sitting cross-legged on the floor near the glass wall. She wore an oversized gray hoodie, her hair tied loosely, eyes fixed on nothing. He froze. Something inside him, the part of him that had forgotten how to react to children, tightened. Caleb hesitated in the hallway, unsure if he should speak. Children in this building usually belong to the upper floors, the kind with tinted windows and last names printed on business cards. Yet here she was, alone, tracing shapes in the fogged glass with her fingertip. He cleared his throat softly. "Hey there," he said, careful not to startle her. "You're going to catch a chill sitting on that cold floor." The girl didn't answer. Her small shoulders barely moved. She seemed absorbed in the act of drawing a crooked little heart on the glass. Caleb glanced around. No adults, no security nearby. "Your folks around?" he asked. Still nothing. He set the mop aside and crouched down to her level. "I'm Caleb," he offered gently. "I take care of this floor. You're safe, I promise." The girl turned her head a little, enough for him to see her eyes. Gray-blue, like the city sky. There was something about that color, fragile, searching, that pressed against the walls he'd built around himself. "My name's Lydia," she said finally, almost whispering. "Nice to meet you, Lydia." He smiled. "That's a fine name." She didn't smile back. "You make things clean," she said, watching the bucket by his knee. "Try to," he replied. "It's what I'm good at." She studied him for a long moment, her brow furrowing. "Can you make sad things clean too?" The question hit harder than he expected. He looked at her small hand, resting on the cold glass. "I wish I could, sweetheart," he said softly. "If I knew how, I'd start with myself." A silence hung between them, fragile as breath. Then a woman's voice echoed from down the corridor, sharp, professional, carrying command even in its worry. "Lydia, there you are." Vivian Hale appeared at the far end of the hall, heels striking marble like metronome beats. Her expression softened when she saw her daughter, then sharpened again when her gaze found Caleb. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quickly, standing. "I didn't mean to." Vivian raised a hand, polite but distant. "It's fine." She wanders. Her eyes scanned his uniform, her tone cooling. "You work here?" "Yes, ma'am. Maintenance." Vivian nodded curtly and crouched beside Lydia.
"Honey, you shouldn't run off like that."
Lydia didn't move. "He was cleaning the floor," she murmured. "He said he'd clean sadness if he could." Vivian blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She looked up at Caleb, and for the first time, their eyes met fully. In that instant, something unspoken passed between them, not recognition, but a quiet familiarity, as if they'd both seen too much emptiness to pretend otherwise. Caleb shifted awkwardly. "She's got a big heart," he said, his voice low. "World needs more of that." Vivian's mouth opened, but no words came. She simply gathered Lydia's hand and stood. "Thank you, Mr. Rowan," he replied. She nodded once. "Mr. Rowan, Then she led Lydia away, their footsteps fading toward the elevator. Caleb watched them go, the air still trembling with the echo of a child's question. When they disappeared around the corner, he exhaled, slow and unsteady. He looked down at his reflection in the freshly polished floor, the face of a man no one noticed, a man who'd long stopped expecting anything from the world. And yet, for the first time in years, something faint stirred behind his ribs. He placed a hand over his chest, just to make sure it was still there. And when he felt the faintest thud beneath his palm, his heart stopped for a beat. The next morning dawned with a lighter sky, the kind Portland rarely offered. Pale sunlight filtered through the glass facade of Hale Biotech Tower, glinting off rain puddles that still clung to the pavement. Inside, everything gleamed. Chrome, marble, silence. Yet to Caleb, the building never felt alive. It was a place that hummed, but never breathed. He began his rounds early, pushing his cart past the executive hallway. Most offices were still dark, but from one, he heard the faint sound of a child humming a broken, hesitant tune that stopped and started again. He followed it quietly, not to intrude, but because something in that fragile melody drew him like gravity. The sound came from the children's room, the same place where he'd met Lydia the day before. The door was ajar. He peeked in. Lydia sat by a low table, crayons scattered around her. She wasn't drawing, but staring at the paper, her fingers tapping softly as if listening to something only she could hear. "Morning," he said gently. She looked up. "You again," he smiled. "Yeah, floors don't clean themselves." She studied him for a long second, then pointed to his mop. "It squeaks." He nodded. "So do I, some mornings." A tiny smile flickered across her lips, barely there, but real. Caleb caught it and pretended not to notice, afraid it might vanish if he did. He looked at the blank paper in front of her. "That your masterpiece?" "I don't know what to draw," she said. "Well," he mused, "that's the trickiest part of art, isn't it? Deciding where to start." She turned a crayon in her hand. "Daddy said to draw what I miss." Caleb's chest tightened. "That's good advice." "What would you draw?" she asked suddenly. He hesitated, caught off guard. "Maybe a park bench." "Oh, that's boring," she said. He chuckled softly. "Maybe, but it's where I used to sit with someone I loved." Lydia tilted her head. "Was it your little girl?" His throat worked. He hadn't told her that. Maybe grief recognized its own reflection. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Her name was Owen." She frowned. "That's a boy's name." It was his, yes. He smiled, the corners of his eyes softening. He liked rockets. Said he'd build one big enough to reach heaven. Lydia's gaze dropped to the paper again. For a while, neither spoke. Then she reached for a blue crayon and drew a crooked line across the page, a sky, trembling but wide. "Maybe your boy's rocket could fly there," she said. Caleb swallowed hard. Maybe it already did. The moment lingered in silence, fragile and pure. He wanted to thank her, but words felt too heavy. So he just nodded and began to mop near the window, his movement steady, rhythmic, almost reverent. When Vivian appeared in the doorway, she stopped short at the sight. Her daughter, who for weeks had been unreachable, was drawing. Not much, not smiling fully, but alive in a way she hadn't been. Caleb noticed her and straightened immediately. "Morning, ma'am." Vivian's voice came softer than usual. "Good morning, Mr. Rowan." She glanced at Lydia. "I see someone found her colors again." Lydia looked up. "He said I should draw what I miss." Vivian's eyes flickered. "Did he now?" Caleb felt suddenly out of place, like a trespasser in a sacred moment. I'll finish up the hall," he murmured. As he turned to leave, Lydia said quietly, "You forgot your squeaky mop." He froze, then smiled over his shoulder. "Keep an eye on it for me." Vivian watched him go, something unreadable passing over her face. There was humility in his voice, a calm that didn't fit the sterile world she ruled. When he disappeared down the corridor, Lydia whispered, "Mommy?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Can he come back tomorrow?" Vivian hesitated. "He doesn't work here for us, darling. He works for the building." Lydia looked down. "Then tell the building to keep him." That night, the rain returned, soft but relentless. Vivian stood at her office window long after everyone else had gone home. The city below glowed under the streetlights, rain sliding down the glass like liquid time. Behind her, Lydia slept on the small couch she'd refused to leave since her father's death. Vivian watched her daughter breathe shallow, peaceful, distant. There were moments she wanted to reach out, to brush the hair from that small forehead, to whisper something motherly and simple. But every time she tried, guilt stopped her hand midair. "You were working that night," the voice in her head reminded her. "You were late to dinner." He took the plane alone. She pressed her palms to the cold glass. She'd built a company that promised to heal the world, but her own home, her own child, had broken quietly under her watch. A sound interrupted her. Thoughts faint, metallic, rhythmic. The mop again. "Caleb." She turned toward the door and, for a moment, hesitated. Then she walked out to the corridor, following the soft echo down the hall. He was there, alone as always, cleaning under the dim fluorescent lights. "You're still here," she said. He looked up, startled, then nodded. "Lots of ground to cover. You can leave that for tomorrow," she said. "I don't like leaving messes overnight." Something in that simple answer made her throat tighten. "Neither do I," she murmured. They stood in silence for a beat. She didn't know why she stayed, perhaps because his presence didn't demand anything, didn't fill the air with advice or sympathy. Just steadiness. "She spoke today," Vivienne said finally. "To you." Caleb nodded slowly. "Kids talk when they feel safe. Sometimes they need someone who's not afraid to listen to the quiet." Vivienne lowered her gaze. "I used to think listening was a weakness. In business, silence means you're losing ground." He leaned on the mop handle, his voice low. "Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe silence is the ground people fall on when there's nowhere else left to stand." The words hung there simple, unpolished, yet true enough to sting. A small cry came from behind them. Lydia had woken and wandered out, her stuffed bear in hand. Her eyes were glassy, frightened. "Mommy," she whispered, clutching the bear tighter. Vivienne crouched down, instinctively reaching for her. "I'm here, sweetheart." But Lydia didn't move. Tears welled in her eyes, her lower lip trembling. Then, for the first time since the crash, the dam inside her broke. "I don't want Daddy to be gone," she cried, voice cracking open. "He promised he said we'd go see the rockets again." Vivienne froze, then gathered her child into her arms. Lydia buried her face against her mother's shoulder, sobbing in heaves that shook them both. For weeks, Vivienne had prayed for her daughter to speak, and now that she did, every word cut straight to the heart. Caleb stood a few steps away, his eyes shining with quiet understanding. He knew that kind of cry, the kind that cleansed and wounded at once. He wanted to turn away, to give them privacy, but couldn't. He knew what it meant to lose, and to finally let go. Vivienne held Lydia tighter. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. We'll see rockets again someday. I promise." Lydia's tears slowed. Her small hand reached blindly toward the janitor standing nearby. "He said his boy liked rockets," she murmured. Caleb's chest constricted. "He did," he whispered. "He thought they could fly high enough to reach the stars." Lydia sniffled, looking up at him. "Maybe Daddy's up there with him." Vivienne followed her daughter's gaze. For the first time, she really looked at Caleb, not as an employee, not as a stranger, but as someone who had survived his own kind of loss. And in that fragile, rain-lit hallway, 3 broken souls stood together, one crying, one comforting, and one remembering how. Lydia's last tear slipped down her cheek and fell onto Vivienne's sleeve. Vivienne didn't wipe it away. She let it sink in, as if her child's grief could wash something clean inside her, too. Later, when Caleb finished his shift and stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was clearing, and for a brief moment, between the clouds, he thought he saw something shimmer, faint, distant, but warm. He smiled. "That's for you, Owen," he murmured. The next morning arrived with the kind of pale sunlight that only seemed to last a few hours in Portland. Vivienne Hale stood in front of the mirror in her private office restroom, buttoning her gray blazer with deliberate precision. Her reflection stared back, composed, flawless, unyielding. But behind that polished mask, something was changing. Lydia had spoken the night before. Just remembering it made Vivienne's chest tighten. Her daughter's small voice had cracked open something she'd buried beneath board reports and stockholder briefings. The sound of her child crying had made every business victory she'd ever celebrated seem meaningless. She touched the edge of her collar, adjusted it once more, and turned toward her desk. The morning agenda blinked on her tablet. 8:30, investor call. Kilens. 10. Board Strategy Session. 10. Internal Facility Review. The last item had been added by her assistant. Facility review usually meant walking the building's lower levels maintenance areas she rarely visited. Normally, she would have delegated it. But today, something urged her not to. She left her office, heels tapping against the marble, and descended through the spotless corridors of Hale Biotech Tower. Every wall gleamed, every panel immaculate. Yet the further down she went, the more she noticed the details she'd never cared about before. The faint hum of the ventilation, the scuff marks at elevator edges, the scent of floor polish and damp cotton. At the sub-level corridor, she saw him. Caleb Rowan was bent over a supply cart, replacing bottles and refilling a bucket with clean water. He looked up when he sensed movement. "Morning, ma'am," he said, standing straight. Vivienne hesitated. "Mr. Rowan, isn't it?" "Yes, ma'am." He gave a polite nod, wiping his hands on a towel tucked into his belt. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her tone more formal than she intended. "For yesterday." Lydia spoke. "That hasn't happened in weeks." Caleb's expression softened. "She's a brave kid." Vivienne nodded, unsure how to continue. Gratitude was not a language she used often. "You seem to understand her," she said finally, "more than the therapists we've hired." He looked down, almost embarrassed. Sometimes kids just need someone who's not afraid of silence. Her gaze lingered on him. There was a calmness in his manner, humble but grounded, that unsettled her in ways she didn't expect. For years, she'd surrounded herself with people who spoke in numbers and projections. Here was a man who spoke in pauses. "Where did you learn that kind of patience?" she asked. He gave a quiet, lopsided smile. "Grief's a slow teacher, ma'am." The words landed heavier than she anticipated. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He shook his head. "Don't be. It's just life doing what it does." "Yeah." For a moment, silence filled the space between them, not the cold silence of offices, but the kind that feels alive, as if both people are trying to listen beyond their own walls. Then her phone buzzed in her hand, slicing the stillness. She glanced down. Incoming call. Victoria Lang. Board chair. Her instinct returned instantly. Straighten posture. Rebuild armor. "Excuse me," she murmured, stepping aside. Her tone shifted as soon as she answered. "Yes, Victoria. I'm aware of the market response." "No. The prototype delay was anticipated. We'll mitigate losses by next quarter." Caleb busied himself wiping the counter nearby, pretending not to hear. But he could see the tension return to her shoulders, the stiffness, the clipped precision in her speech. He'd seen it in other people who lived too long behind walls. When she ended the call, she found him watching quietly. "Do you ever get tired of all that?" he asked softly. Vivienne blinked. "Of what?" "Talking like everything's fine when it's not." Her lips parted, but no answer came. He dipped his mop back into the bucket, wrung it out slowly. "Sometimes people clean floors because it's something you can actually fix." She watched him work, his movements steady, rhythmic, methodical. It struck her that what he said was not simple at all. "Mr. Rowan," she said after a pause, "I'd like you to keep visiting the upper floor for a while. I think Lydia responds to you. Maybe you could help with her room, keep things comfortable." He hesitated. "Are you sure that's—" "I'm sure." Their eyes met again. For a fleeting moment, two very different worlds, power and humility, loss and patience, stood on the same ground. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. Vivienne almost smiled. "You can call me Vivienne." He nodded once. "All right, Vivienne." Ugh. That afternoon, the sky over Portland turned heavy and gray again, rain whispering against the tall glass of Hale Biotech Tower. Inside the boardroom on the 40th floor, the light was sharp and white, glinting off the long steel table where 12 executives sat today. Their voices filled the room like a low, simmering storm. "Vivienne, the shareholders are nervous," said Victoria Lang, her voice precise as the click of her silver pen. "They're asking questions about your personal decisions." "Oh." Vivienne folded her hands calmly on the table. "Which decisions?" "The janitor," Victoria replied. "Mr. Rowan, we've heard he's been spending time with your daughter in the executive wing. That's unorthodox." Across the table, David Park, head of operations, added, "Optics matter, Vivienne. "We can't afford a headline about the CEO letting maintenance staff care for her child." Vivian's pulse tightened, but her face remained still.
He isn't caring for her. He's been kind to her.
That's all. Victoria leaned forward. "This isn't about kindness. It's about judgment. The market is volatile, and you're making emotional decisions. Are you sure you're not projecting your own grief?" Vivian's eyes hardened. "My daughter spoke for the first time in weeks because of him. If that's a mistake, I'll make it again." A tense silence filled the room. The rain tapped against the glass like tiny fists. Finally, Victoria sighed. "You've always been the most rational person in this company. Don't lose that now." When the meeting ended, Vivian stayed seated as everyone left. Her reflection shimmered in the window-sharp suit, tired eyes, a woman holding herself together by will alone. For the first time, she wondered if Victoria was right. Had she become reckless? Or was she finally human again? Downstairs, Caleb Rowan was fixing a broken faucet in the cafe restroom when Rosa, the cafe manager, peeked in. "Senor Caleb, you look tired," she said warmly. "You need a break. See?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe later." "You work too much," she said, wagging a finger. "But I see the way that little girl looks at you, like you're made of sunlight." Caleb chuckled. "Sunlight? Haven't heard that in a while." "You bring peace," Rosa replied. "Even Miss Pierce smiles more now. You keep doing what you're doing." He nodded, though he didn't quite believe her. Peace was something he still didn't know how to keep. That evening, Vivian found herself standing outside the small art room again. Lydia was there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by crayons and paper. Caleb sat a few feet away, whittling something small from a piece of wood. "What are you making?" Lydia asked. He smiled. "You'll see." Vivienne stepped closer. "You two seem busy." Lydia looked up. "Uncle Caleb's making a surprise." Vivienne blinked. "Uncle." The word startled her. Lydia hadn't used it for anyone else since Richard died. Caleb finished shaping the piece and handed it to the little girl, a tiny wooden rocket. Smooth but imperfect, its edges soft. "Now your drawings can fly," he said quietly. Lydia's face lit up. "It's just like Daddy's rocket." Vivienne knelt beside her daughter, tears pricking her eyes. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Then Lydia turned to Caleb and asked, "Did your boy like rockets too?" The room fell still. Caleb met Vivienne's gaze. He could have lied, but something about the warmth in that child's eyes made him speak the truth. "Yes," he said softly. "He loved them." Lydia held the wooden rocket to her chest. "Then I'll take care of this one for both of them." Vivienne swallowed hard. There was a grace in that moment she couldn't describe, a quiet exchange of pain that somehow became love. When Lydia went to wash her hands, Vivienne lingered near the door. "She called you Uncle Caleb." He smiled faintly. "I hope that's okay." "It is," she said, voice trembling slightly. "More than okay." They stood there for a moment, watching the child who had once refused to speak now humming softly to herself, tracing the lines of a new drawing, a small rocket flying toward a bright, endless sky. Vivienne turned to him, her tone quiet but steady. "Mr. Rowan, I don't know what you've done, but thank you." He shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just don't stop believing she can heal." Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Through the high windows, the first hint of sunset burned faintly over the Portland skyline. Inside, for the first time in months, laughter, soft, fragile, but real, filled the air. Vivienne looked at Caleb and felt the first flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And somewhere deep inside her heart, a voice whispered what she hadn't dared to say aloud. Maybe redemption doesn't come from power. Maybe it comes from kindness. By Friday, the calm inside Hale Biotech Tower had begun to shift. It started as murmurs, whispers caught between the clatter of coffee cups and the shuffle of polished shoes. The cleaning staff noticed first, then the receptionists, then the executives. The CEO's daughter had bonded with the janitor. By noon, even the journalists had caught the scent. Vivienne's assistant, Marla, rushed into her office holding a tablet. "You need to see this," she said breathlessly. Vivienne glanced up from her paperwork. "What is it?" Marla hesitated. "The Oregon Ledger just published something. It's spreading fast." On the screen, A headline blazed across a photo of Hale Biotech Tower. Billionaire CEO hires janitor to care for daughter compassion or breakdown? Vivienne's breath caught. The article continued below, filled with speculation. Sources claim CEO Vivienne Hale has developed an unusual friendship between her grieving daughter and a building janitor, raising concerns about her mental stability following her husband's death. Her pulse thudded in her ears. How did they even— Someone in the boardroom leaked it, Marla said quietly.
Probably Victoria. It's all over social media already.
Vivienne lowered the tablet, staring blankly at the skyline outside. Rain slid down the window like cold veins of glass. She'd survived worse storms in business, but this one struck where she was weakest. Find out who's behind it, she said softly, and keep Lydia away from any cameras. Yes, ma'am. After Marla left, Vivienne sat motionless. For the first time in her career, she didn't know whether to fight or to protect. Downstairs, Caleb was cleaning the main lobby when Rosa hurried up to him, her apron still dusted with flour. Señor Caleb, she said, lowering her voice. People are talking. They say you are famous now. He frowned. Famous? She nodded, pulling out her phone and showing him the same headline. They make it sound bad, but I know your heart. Don't you worry. He stared at the screen. The words blurred. His stomach dropped. I didn't do anything wrong, he said quietly. I know, Rosa said. But sometimes the world doesn't care who's right. It just wants a story. M. Quote. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I should go talk to her, Mrs. Hale, before this gets worse. That evening, after most of the building emptied, he took the elevator to the top floor. The doors opened to silence, the kind that lives inside tension. Vivienne stood by the window, arms folded, staring out at the city. You've seen it, she said before he could speak. Yes. She turned. Her eyes were calm, but beneath that calm was exhaustion. The board thinks I've lost my mind. Have you? He asked gently. A small, humorless smile tugged at her lips. Maybe, but for the first time, I don't care. He stepped closer, careful, respectful. They're wrong about you. They're not wrong about the optics, she said bitterly. A CEO letting her child spend hours with a janitor? It sounds absurd. Maybe, he said. But healing doesn't care about job titles. She looked at him then, really looked. You're not afraid of me, are you? He shook his head. No, ma'am. You bleed the same as the rest of us. For a long moment, they just stood there, two people caught between scandal and truth, between what the world expected and what they both quietly needed to believe. Then Vivienne's phone buzzed again. Another message from Victoria. Emergency board meeting, Monday. We need to discuss your arrangement. Her jaw tightened. They're going to try to remove me, Caleb frowned. Because of me? Because of what you represent, she said. Because compassion doesn't fit inside their spreadsheets. He nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time someone reminded them what really matters. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the city. Not loud, but close enough to promise a coming storm. By Monday morning, the rumor had turned into a storm. Cameras gathered outside Hale Biotech, reporters shouting questions Vivienne refused to answer. Inside, tension crackled like static. Two uniformed officers appeared in the lobby, asking for Mr. Kalip. He was sitting with Lydia in the cafe, showing her how to fold a paper star. When he saw the badges, he straightened. Sir, one officer said, we received a complaint. We just need to ask you a few questions. Lydia's face went pale. You're taking him away? She cried, clutching his hand. No, sweetheart, Caleb said softly. It's okay, but her voice rose in panic. You can't. He didn't do anything. Vivienne appeared, then calm, controlled, her heels echoing sharply across the marble. Officers, she said, stepping between them. Mr. Rowan works for me. If you have questions, they go through my legal team. The taller officer hesitated. Ma'am, it's standard procedure. Then follow it properly, she said evenly. Until then, he stays. The room fell silent. Lydia's sobs quieted. Caleb looked at Vivienne, his gratitude unspoken but clear. When the officers finally left, Vivienne turned to him. They won't stop, he said. I know, she replied, but neither will I. For the first time, He saw the steel and the warmth in her coexisting the CEO and the mother, finally the same person. Outside, the cameras kept flashing, but inside, a fragile peace settled. Lydia held her paper star up to the light and whispered, "It's still shining." Vivienne smiled faintly. "Yes, sweetheart. It always will." M2A. The storm outside had passed, but inside Hale Biotech Tower, the air felt heavier than ever. For days, Vivienne had barely slept. Between damage control meetings and angry calls from investors, she lived in a fog of exhaustion. That Thursday evening, she sat at her desk long after everyone had gone home. Papers lay scattered, untouched, on the couch nearby. Lydia slept curled beneath a blanket, her small teddy bear tucked under her chin. The soft rhythm of her breathing was the only sound in the room. Vivienne gazed at her daughter and whispered, "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner." Her voice barely reached the window. A knock sounded. Caleb stepped in, holding a box of maintenance records. "Didn't mean to bother you," he said quietly. "You're not," she replied. "You're one of the few people I can stand to see these days." He smiled faintly. "That's a promotion, I guess." She leaned back, exhaling. "You ever feel like no matter what you do, the world's just waiting for you to fail?" "Every day after the accident," he said simply. "But failure's not the end, Vivienne. It's just the part where you learn who stays." His words settled deep, steadying her. Before she could answer, a faint sound interrupted them, the elevator chime. Then silence. "Security?" she called out. No answer. She stood quickly, scanning the room. The couch was empty. Lydia's blanket lay crumpled. Her pulse spiked. "Lydia?" Nothing. Caleb dropped the file box and ran toward the hallway. They searched the top floor, then the executive wing, but every room was empty. The building's silence suddenly felt enormous. Vivienne's voice trembled. "She was right here, 10 minutes ago." Caleb's eyes darted to the security monitor. "Check the cameras." Vivienne hit the controls. The screens flickered, then showed a small figure stepping into the elevator alone, clutching a teddy bear. "Oh my God," Vivienne gasped. "Where is she going?" Caleb leaned closer, recognizing the background. "That's the old headquarters. She's been asking about it. She can't go there. It's been closed for years." He was already moving toward the door. "Stay here. Call the police. I'll find her." Vivienne grabbed his arm. "I'm coming with you." "No," he said firmly. "If she's scared, she'll run. She trusts me." Their eyes met a mother's terror and a father's instinct. "Please bring her back," Vivienne whispered. "I will," he said, and was gone. Rain began again as he ran through the parking lot, headlights streaking across the wet asphalt. Somewhere ahead, a little girl was alone in the dark with her grief, and he knew that kind of loneliness all too well. He gripped the wheel of his old truck, muttering, "Hold on, kid. I'm coming." Ugh. The streets were slick and empty, rain whispering against the windshield as Caleb's truck raced through the sleeping city. His headlights caught the faded sign ahead, Hale Biotech, old headquarters. The building loomed like a ghost from another life, its windows dark, its name half erased by time. He parked, grabbed his flashlight, and ran through the side alley. The main entrance was locked, but he knew another way, the service door where janitors once entered years ago. It gave way with a heavy creak. Inside, everything smelled of dust and rusted air. His footsteps echoed through hollow corridors. "Lydia," he called softly. Only silence answered. Then, faintly, a sound. A hiccuping sob. He followed it up the stairwell, past peeling posters and abandoned offices, until a dim glow appeared under one door. He pushed it open. Lydia sat in the corner, clutching her teddy bear under the light of a small flashlight. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks streaked with tears. "Uncle Caleb," she whispered. "I wanted to find Daddy." Caleb knelt beside her, lowering his voice. "You scared us half to death, sweetheart." Tears spilled anew. "Mommy said this was where he worked. I thought if I came here, maybe I could feel him again." He took her small hands in his. "You don't have to come here to find him. He's not lost. He's right here." He touched her heart gently. "And every time you laugh or draw or dream, that's him smiling through you," she sniffled. "But I don't want to forget him." "You won't," he said softly. Look in the mirror sometime, you've got his eyes. For a long moment, she stared at him, the truth sinking in through her trembling breath. Then she leaned forward and hugged him tight, her tears soaking his shoulder. I miss him, she sobbed. I know, he murmured. I miss my boy, too. In that forgotten building, surrounded by the dust of old memories, two broken hearts found each other's rhythm again. Footsteps echoed behind them. Lydia! Vivienne's voice, shaking with fear. She appeared in the doorway, her coat dripping with rain. When she saw her daughter safe in Caleb's arms, her knees nearly gave way. Mommy! Lydia cried, running to her. Vivienne dropped to the floor, holding her child close. You scared me, baby. Don't ever do that again. I'm sorry, Lydia whispered. I just wanted to find Daddy. Vivienne kissed her hair, tears streaming freely. He found you instead. Then she looked up at Caleb. Their eyes met no words, only gratitude so deep it needed none. Caleb stood, voice low. She wasn't lost, Vivienne. She just needed to be reminded she was still loved. Vivienne nodded, unable to speak. Together, they walked out into the night, a mother, a child, and the man who had carried light into their darkness. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds thinned, revealing a single star above the city. Lydia looked up and whispered, That's Daddy's rocket. Vivienne squeezed her daughter's hand. Yes, sweetheart. And it finally found its way home. Morning broke pale and clean after the night of rain. Outside the old Hale building, puddles gleamed like small mirrors, catching the first gold of dawn. Caleb stood beside his truck, watching Vivienne and Lydia walk toward him from the parking lot. The child still clutched her bear, but her steps were light again. Sleep any? He asked. Vivienne smiled faintly. Not really, but I don't mind. She's home. Lydia climbed into the truck's front seat, swinging her legs. Uncle Caleb, she said. Mommy said you make toys. He chuckled. I used to. Then can you make one for Daddy too, so he doesn't get lonely up there? The question landed soft but deep. I think I already did, he said. You, M? She grinned, uncomprehending but happy, and Vivienne blinked back sudden tears. That week, the story that had once humiliated Vivienne turned into something else. Reporters kept calling, but instead of hiding, she called a press conference in the company atrium. My daughter is alive today because someone reminded her that love isn't measured by status, she said. Sometimes the people we overlook carry the wisdom we need most. When the cameras flashed, Caleb stood quietly in the back, uncomfortable in his borrowed suit. Vivienne gestured toward him. This is Mr. Rowan. He lost his son, but he never lost his heart. Because of him, Lydia found hers again. The room fell silent. Even the press lowered their lenses for a moment. Afterward, in her office, Vivienne placed a small folder on the table. I want to start something new, she told him. A program for children who've lost someone. Free art classes, counseling, safe places to talk. You could lead it. Caleb stared at her. I'm no counselor, Vivienne. I fix things, not people. She smiled gently. That's exactly why you're right for it. You listen. You see what others miss. He hesitated. What would we call it? Vivienne looked toward Lydia, who was coloring by the window. Sunlight tangled in her hair. How about Ethan's light? Caleb froze. The name hung between them, fragile as breath. Why that? Because your son's kindness lit our way, she said. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then he nodded, voice rough. Only if it helps more kids find theirs. Vivienne extended her hand. Then it settled. Endo. Outside, a new day unfolded, quiet, real, filled with the hum of healing. 2 months later, the community center finally opened its doors. It wasn't fancy, just a bright corner on the first floor of Hale Biotech's downtown building, but when the morning sun poured through the windows, it felt like the heart of something new. A hand-painted sign hung above the entrance, Ethan's Light, where every child belongs. Inside, children's laughter replaced the echo of machines. There were no suits, no meetings, only crayons, music, and small voices telling big stories. Caleb moved slowly among the kids, helping one fix a broken paintbrush, showing another how to carve a little star from soft wood. The sound of their chatter filled the room like a hymn. Vivienne watched from the doorway, her coffee forgotten in her hands. She'd seen 100 product launches in her life, but never one that made her chest ache this way. It wasn't about business or image anymore. It was about healing, real and unpolished. At a table near the window, Lydia sat with a shy boy who refused to talk. "You can draw instead," she said kindly, handing him a red crayon. "My dad used to say colors talk when words can't." The boy hesitated, then began to draw two rockets soaring side by side. Caleb glanced over and smiled. "She's got her mother's courage," he said softly. Vivienne chuckled. "And your passions." He shrugged. "Guess that makes us even." Later that day, after the last class ended, the volunteers gathered to hang framed photos along the hallway, pictures of the first group of children to join Ethan's light. Each frame carried a handwritten note underneath. "Braver than yesterday, kinder than before." Caleb stopped in front of one photo, a small boy holding a paper airplane, grinning at the camera. He didn't know the child's name, but the smile reminded him of Ethan's that wide, fearless joy that once filled his kitchen. His throat tightened. Vivienne came to stand beside him. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said after a pause. "It just hits sometimes. How simple happiness used to be." She nodded, her voice soft. "It still can be. It just takes more courage to notice it now." He looked at her then, not with sorrow, but with quiet recognition. She understood the ache without needing to explain it. For both of them, love had turned into something quieter but stronger, purpose. That evening, the center hosted its first family night. Parents brought casseroles and homemade cookies. Rosa brewed coffee that filled the air with cinnamon, and the lights from the city outside painted soft patterns on the walls. Caleb stood near the stage, looking awkward in a pressed shirt that Lydia insisted he wear. Vivienne took the microphone. "Before we eat," she began, "I want to thank someone who helped make all this possible." She turned toward Caleb, who looked instantly uncomfortable. "He didn't plan this, but he built it with his hands and with his heart." The crowd clapped warmly. Caleb shook his head, smiling shyly. "I just cleaned floors," he muttered. Vivienne continued, her voice trembling slightly. "When I lost my husband, I thought success would fill the silence. When Caleb lost his son, he thought work would bury the pain. But somewhere in between, we both found something better, hope." She glanced toward Lydia, who waved from the front row, her face glowing. "Our children remind us that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering with love." Then she nodded toward the large canvas on the wall, a painting the kids had made together. It showed a dark night sky filled with golden stars, and in the center, a small rocket bursting upward. At the bottom, in bright blue letters, the children had written, "For Ethan, who taught us to shine." Caleb swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "He would have liked that," he whispered. Vivienne smiled gently. "He already does." When the crowd began to thin, the two of them stepped outside into the cool night air. Portland's skyline shimmered beyond the river, and the faint hum of traffic sounded almost like a lullaby. Lydia ran ahead to chase fireflies along the path. "She's different now," Vivienne said quietly. "Happier, stronger." "So are you?" Caleb replied. She looked up at the glowing sign above the door. "I used to think strength meant never breaking. Now I think it's about learning how to start again." He nodded slowly. "Grief doesn't end. It just learns to live beside love." Vivienne met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've become part of our family, Caleb. You know that, right?" He smiled, a real one, soft and unguarded. "You already were mine." They stood in silence for a while, watching Lydia's laughter ripple through the twilight. Above them, the stars were faint but steady, scattered lights against a wide, forgiving sky. "Look," Lydia called, pointing upward. "That one's Ethan's star, the big one." Caleb followed her finger, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel the old ache in his chest. He felt peace. Vivienne slipped her arm through his. "Then we'll make sure it never fades," she said. And as they walked back toward the warm glow of Ethan's light, the laughter of children followed them, bright, endless, and full of grace. A full year had passed since that long night of rain, yet some memories still lingered in Vivienne's mind. Lydia's frightened sobs, Caleb's steady voice in the dark, the storm that ended in light. But now, those memories didn't hurt. They reminded her of how far they had all come. Ethan's light had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. What started as one small room filled with crayons and hope had become 10 centers across Oregon places, where children who'd lost someone could laugh, draw, and learn to breathe again. Parents volunteered, teachers donated time, and sometimes strangers just stopped by to listen. For Vivian, this success wasn't about reputation or redemption. It was about watching children who had once sat silent now telling their stories through colors and songs. It was about knowing her daughter smiled again, really smiled. That Saturday morning, the anniversary celebration filled the main center with warmth and chatter. Balloons framed the doors, the scent of coffee and muffins floated from Rose's cafe, and laughter echoed down the hall. Vivienne moved among the guests, shaking hands, thanking volunteers, her gray coat replaced with a simple blue sweater. Gone was the rigid CEO from the glass tower. In her place stood a mother still proud, but gentler, her voice carrying a kindness she had once hidden. Lydia was setting up paper lanterns with other children. Her cheeks were pink with excitement. "Uncle Caleb's late again," she complained cheerfully. "But he said he's working on a secret." Vivian smiled. "He's always working on one." She watched her daughter move with quiet grace. There was still a trace of sadness in her eyes, but it had softened into strength. Lydia had learned that missing someone didn't mean living in the dark. It meant carrying their light forward. When Caleb finally arrived, he was a little out of breath, his jacket damp from the drizzle outside. He carried a small wooden box wrapped with twine. "Sorry," he said, catching his breath. "Traffic and stubborn wood don't mix." Lydia ran to him, her shoes squeaking on the floor. "You made it. What's in the box?" He smiled, handing it to her. "A memory you can hold." "Oh." Inside lay a small rocket carved from oak, painted in soft gold and silver. It wasn't perfect. One wing was slightly crooked, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. On the base, in tiny letters, were the words, "To the stars, where love never ends." Lydia gasped. "It's Daddy's rocket." Vivian bent to look closer, her voice trembling. "You made this for her?" Caleb nodded. "For her and for him." Lydia hugged it tightly, her small hands tracing the carved letters, as if reading them into her heart. "Can we hang it in Ethan's room?" she asked. Vivian blinked back tears. "We'll find a special place for it, sweetheart." When the ceremony began, families gathered in the large hall filled with soft golden light. On the stage, a simple banner read, "1 year of healing. One light for every heart." Children's drawings covered the walls, stars, rockets, hearts, and rainbows. Vivienne walked up to the microphone first, her voice steady but warm. "A year ago, this place didn't exist," she began. "A year ago, my daughter barely spoke, and I had forgotten what it meant to hope. Then someone reminded me that healing doesn't come from wealth or power, it comes from compassion." She turned toward Caleb, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. "This man helped my daughter find her voice again, and through her, he helped me find mine." The audience applauded softly, not out of politeness, but out of recognition. They all knew loss. They all knew gratitude. Vivienne stepped down, and Caleb slowly made his way to the stage. Caleb stood at the microphone for a long moment, his hands slightly trembling. He wasn't used to speeches or attention. The faces in the audience, parents, children, volunteers, blurred together in a sea of soft color. Then his eyes found Lydia sitting beside Vivienne, clutching the wooden rocket in her lap. The sight steadied him. "I'm not a great speaker," he began, voice low and honest. "I'm just a man who once lost everything that made life make sense. For a long time, I thought grief was a hole you never climbed out of." The room was silent. Even the smallest children stopped fidgeting. But then a little girl sat beside me and reminded me that love doesn't vanish, it changes form. It becomes stories, laughter, even tears. It becomes the reason we reach for each other again. He paused, drawing a breath that shook slightly. "Ethan's light isn't just my son's name. It's a promise that pain doesn't have to end something. Sometimes it's the beginning of something better, something shared." When he stepped back, the hall rose in quiet applause. Lydia ran up onto the stage, her small shoes tapping against the wood, and threw her arms around him. "I love you, Uncle Caleb," she said into the microphone. Laughter rippled through the crowd, followed by a warmth that filled the room. Vivienne joined them, resting a gentle hand on his arm. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb smiled softly. You don't thank family. That evening, after the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, the three of them walked together through the small park behind the center. The air smelled of rain and cedar, and the distant city shimmered beyond the trees. Lydia skipped ahead, humming the same tune she used to hum when she was sad, only now it sounded light, alive. Vivienne and Caleb followed in quiet companionship. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It felt like peace. Do you ever think about the future? Vivienne asked finally. Caleb looked up at the faint stars emerging through the mist. I used to be afraid of it. But now, I think the future's just another way of saying we still have someone to care for. She smiled, eyes glistening. That's a good way to put it. They reached the old swing set where Lydia had stopped. She was looking up at the sky, pointing to two bright stars shining side by side. Mommy, Uncle Caleb, she called. Look, that's Daddy and Ethan. They're together. Vivienne knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I think you're right, sweetheart, and they're proud of us. Caleb stood behind them, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the stars. They found their light, he said softly. Now it's our turn to keep it burning. Lydia smiled sleepily, and Vivienne lifted her into her arms. As they walked back toward the warm glow of the center, their shadows stretched long across the path, three figures merging into one. At the door, Vivienne paused and looked back at the night sky. You know, she said quietly, we were strangers once. Caleb nodded. Now we're family. And somewhere far above the clouds, two stars burned brighter, as if nodding in agreement. Because sometimes, family isn't the one we're born into. It's the one we find when the world breaks and someone chooses to stay. Sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest. In the end, Ethan's light wasn't just a place. It was a reminder that healing often begins with small, unspoken acts of kindness. Vivienne found her heart again. Caleb rediscovered his purpose, and little Lydia taught them both that love can survive anything, even loss. The three of them didn't rebuild the past. They built something new, a family, not by blood, but by choice. When we reach a certain age, we start to understand that life's greatest miracles don't come wrapped in success or wealth. They come in moments of connection. Maybe it's the way a child's laughter fills an empty room, or the way someone quietly sets an extra plate at the dinner table, just in case an old friend drops by. These are the quiet gestures that build a home, even after everything else has fallen apart. And perhaps that's the real lesson behind this story. Love, in its purest form, is redemption. Kindness is a language the heart never forgets. And no matter how far we've wandered, there is always a way back to forgiveness, to family, to the light we thought we lost. Like a porch lamp left burning through the night, even the smallest kindness can guide someone home through the darkest hours. In a world where so much is measured by success, maybe the truest measure of a life well lived is how deeply we've cared for others. So tonight, before you turn off the lights or pour that last cup of tea, take a moment to think of someone who once made your world brighter. Maybe it was a neighbor who checked in, a teacher who believed in you, or a friend who refused to give up when you did. Reach out, even with just a few words, because every gentle act, every spark of compassion keeps the human spirit alive. If this story touched your heart, press 1-inch the comments. If you felt it could be told better, or have thoughts to share, press 0 and tell us how you'd make it stronger. Your voice matters here, because stories like this one belong to all of us, the dreamers, the healers, the ones still learning how to love again. And if this story reminded you of someone you once called home, keep that light burning, because somewhere out there, someone might still be following it back to you.